Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Is the universe just a random, eternal collision of matter, or is there an ultimate order and purpose behind it all?
Wow, yeah, starting right with the big ones today.
We have to. Today, we are taking a profound look at the clash between the concept of God and atheistic philosophies. We will explore how thinkers like Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud tried to deconstruct religion.
And how philosophers push back against that.
Exactly, arguing that without a guiding force, both science and human freedom completely unraveled. It is a battle of meaning, chance, and the very nature of reality.
It truly is. It's a philosophical heavyweight match. The questions we are tackling today, they form the very bedrock of how humanity understands existence.
Yeah, I really do.
We are going to be drawing heavily from the works of Professor Yuni Sezen, specifically his sociocultural analysis in a text called Culture Vedin, alongside Mustafa Shekip Ton's really profound philosophical explorations in Bir Din Felsefesine Doğru.
And our mission for you, the listener, is to just step back and impartially examine the architecture of this massive historical debate. We are looking at atheism and materialism on one side, and the belief in God and a structured universe on the other.
Right, and we should clarify, we aren't here to endorse one worldview over the other.
No, not at all. Or to tell you what to believe. We are simply laying out the very best arguments these historical texts have to offer so you can understand the foundation of the debate. But before we jump into the deep end, if you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button. It really helps us keep bringing you these deep dives.
That impartiality you mentioned, it's crucial here. We will be dealing with intensely debated historical and philosophical viewpoints today, some of which, they attempt to completely deconstruct the other.
Yeah.
Our goal is strictly to report on the ideas contained in these source materials and just observe how these thinkers constructed their worldviews.
Okay, let's unpack this. The sources start by outlining the major atheistic critiques of religion, specifically looking through the lenses of Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Sigmund Freud.
Right, the big three.
Yeah, the big three. And what stands out immediately in Sezen's analysis is that these thinkers didn't just argue against the existence of a deity. They took it a step further.
They really did. They attempted to diagnose exactly why humanity felt this desperate need to invent religion in the first place.
Exactly. They approached religion not as a cosmic truth to be evaluated, but as a sociological or a psychological phenomenon to be explained away.
Like a symptom of an underlying human condition.
Yes. Let's start with Karl Marx. I mean, almost everyone has heard his famous phrase that religion is the opium of the masses.
Oh, absolutely.
But Sezen's text adds a really fascinating layer of nuance here that often gets lost in popular culture. It was not just about wealthy, cynical elites using religion to suppress the working class.
No, it was much more systemic than that.
Right. Marx posited that religion is actually a self-deception, one that oppressed people actively generate themselves just to keep their heads above water in a brutal world.
The phrasing Marx used is that religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature and the heart of a heartless world.
The heart of a heartless world. That's powerful.
It is. In a purely material universe where 19th century industrial workers were just being crushed by the factory system, Marx argued that religion offered the only available semblance of humanity.
Like a coping mechanism.
Exactly, a coping mechanism for survival. For Marx, the critique of religion was actually the prerequisite for all other critiques. He believed that before humans could address their material suffering, they first had to abandon the comforting illusion of an afterlife.
So that sets up a purely socioeconomic critique. But when we transition to Friedrich Nietzsche, the argument takes a much darker, almost medical turn.
Oh, very much so.
Nietzsche essentially argued that religion is a form of mental illness born from repressed human instincts and a deeply unnatural sense of guilt.
Nietzsche's framework is heavily tied to his concept of master and slave morality. He viewed traditional religion as a psychological tool used by the weak to constrain the strong.
Right, to hold them back.
Exactly. In his view, natural human instincts for power, dominance, and earthly vitality were suddenly labeled as evil. And what is incredibly fascinating in Sezen's breakdown of Nietzsche is the role of the priest or the clergy.
Yeah, the sources mention that Nietzsche viewed the priest essentially as a doctor.
A doctor who creates a monopoly on a cure by inventing a disease.
That captures his argument perfectly.
Nietzsche claimed religious figures diagnose humanity with a fabricated disease called sin. Once they convince the population that they are inherently sick, the clergy position themselves as the sole providers of the cure.
Salvation.
Exactly, salvation. It is a brilliant, albeit brutal, psychological critique that attempts to explain the entire power structure of religious institutions as just a manifestation of neurosis and guilt.
Which flows incredibly well into Sigmund Freud's perspective. Freud took that idea of neurosis and expanded it to encompass the entirety of human development.
He argued that religion is basically a psychological illusion.
A roadmap for life built entirely on unfulfilled sexual instincts and childhood anxieties.
Freud viewed religion as a masked illusion grounded in the human desire for a protective father figure. When confronted with the terrifying, uncontrollable forces of nature—
Earthquakes, disease, death.
Exactly. Humans project the image of a comforting, omnipotent father onto the cosmos. To Freud, religious rituals are essentially obsessive-compulsive behaviors designed to soothe the anxiety of our chaotic existence.
Because the world is scary.
Right. And he argued that as humanity matures scientifically, it should outgrow this infantile need for a cosmic protector.
What's remarkable is just how comprehensive this three-pronged attack is. You have Marx attacking from the socio-economic angle, Nietzsche from the moral and philosophical angle, and Freud from the psychoanalytic angle.
It's a very thorough deconstruction.
It is. But the texts we are exploring don't just present these critiques in a vacuum. They pivot to the counterarguments. And this is where the philosophy gets incredibly dense.
It really does.
Because while these materialistic views attempt to explain religion away, they simultaneously trap themselves in a purely physical universe.
What's fascinating here is the logical trap that materialist philosophy builds for itself. Materialism, which is the necessary foundation for Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud's critiques, assumes that matter and material events are the only things that exist.
And that matter is eternal.
Exactly. But Yumni Sazin points out a glaring logical contradiction in this assumption.
Let's follow that logic. If we assume the purely materialist view that matter is eternal and everything is just a result of random, unguided chance, how does that start to break reality as we know it?
Well, Sazin argues that matter, by its very definition, cannot be infinite, because matter inherently possesses physical dimensions. It is three-dimensional, it occupies space, and it consists of parts.
Whether those are molecules, atoms, or subatomic particles.
Right. If something is composed of parts that can be theoretically counted or measured, it has boundaries. And if it has boundaries, it cannot logically be infinite.
Makes total sense.
The concept of infinite greatness or infinite smallness, in a purely physical, material sense, eventually hits a mathematical and logical wall.
So, if matter isn't infinite and it has boundaries, the immediate follow-up question has to be, what exists beyond those boundaries? What existed before it?
That is the exact question materialists struggle to answer. And the sources point out that even the historical founders of this worldview couldn't agree on its basic reality.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Sazin notes an intense philosophical disagreement between Marx and Friedrich Engels on how to even define matter. Engels argued that we must use our reason to understand it, pointing out that no one had ever literally seen a vibrating atom with their naked eye, yet we know it exists.
But Marx pushed back against that, didn't he?
He did. Marx argued that reality is strictly tied to human sensory perception. If you can't touch, taste, or see it with your senses, you cannot claim it is materially real.
Which leads to a profound philosophical dead end. I mean, if reality is strictly defined by what our physical senses can detect, what happens to the universe before sensory creatures evolve?
Exactly. Did the physical universe simply not exist before eyes were there to perceive it? It's a trap of their own making.
Yeah.
Furthermore, if you commit to the idea that the universe is just a product of eternal matter and blind, random chance, you aren't just deconstructing religion. You are completely undermining the foundation of science.
That seems counterintuitive at first glance, but the text breaks it down beautifully. Science relies fundamentally on causal determinism, right? The premise that we can trace any physical state back to prior physical conditions.
Whether it's celestial mechanics or cellular division.
Exactly. The text used the word nizam, meaning a deep underlying structured order. How does a universe built purely on random chance threaten that order?
Because science requires predictable laws, causality, and repetition to function. If everything in the universe is truly just a chaotic accident—
A random collision of atoms over billions of years.
Right, then there is no underlying logic to investigate. Research, investigation, and the scientific method itself become meaningless in a universe ruled entirely by chance.
Because there's no why or how to find.
Exactly. If you claim that random chance somehow managed to create a perfectly ordered universe where complex scientific laws function flawlessly and consistently, you are engaging in extreme intellectual acrobatics.
I notice Cezanne uses a really vivid analogy in the text to explain this tension between freedom, chance, and order. He mentioned something about a car without a brake system. How does he use that to explain the necessity of intent in the universe?
It's a brilliant visualization. Cizan asks you to imagine you are driving a car, and you suddenly realize the vehicle has absolutely no brakes.
Terrifying.
Truly. Technically, you are free, you are moving, and momentum will take you wherever physics dictates. But that freedom without a brake system just leads to absolute chaos, destruction, and ultimately a crash.
Because it has no purpose.
Right. Brakes represent intent. They represent design, control, and a specific goal. They are what allow you to navigate safely to a destination.
And the text connects that mechanical idea of a brake system to the natural world, specifically the Earth's ozone layer, right?
Yes. The ozone layer sits in the upper atmosphere, and it acts as a cosmic brake system. It meticulously filters out deadly ultraviolet rays from the sun, but allows the life-giving light and heat to pass through.
It's highly specific.
Exactly. It acts as a fine-tuned brake that allows biology to flourish on this planet. Cezanne's argument is, can we really observe a system this precise, this perfectly calibrated to sustain human life, and conclude that it is totally blind, accidental, and completely without an intelligent designer?
When you observe a brake system, you immediately recognize the presence of an engineer.
Precisely.
So we have this incredible tension between the atheist critique of religion as a psychological coping mechanism and the religious philosophical critique of materialism as a logical impossibility that destroys the basis of science.
A heavy clash.
Very heavy. And I want to shift into our other source, Mustafa Shakib Kuntz, because he takes this tension and puts it under a microscope.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Kuntz outlines that this friction often arises because modern society fundamentally confuses the roles of science and religion.
How so?
Science is fundamentally designed to explain the how. How does gravity pull objects together? How do vaccines interact with the human immune system?
The mechanics of it all.
Right. But religion, and specifically the philosophy of religion, is designed to answer the why. Why is there a universe at all? Why do these laws of physics exist in this highly specific way?
Kuntz goes incredibly deep into the concept of causality. Earlier we mentioned causal determinism. Every effect has a cause. But tracing that chain of causes backward creates a massive problem for the purely materialist worldview, doesn't it?
It creates an insurmountable problem known as infinite regress. If every effect requires a prior cause, you can trace that chain backward indefinitely. But you cannot logically have an infinite chain of causes without a starting point.
It has to begin somewhere.
Imagine an infinitely long train of boxcars moving along a track. Even if every single boxcar is being pulled by the one immediately in front of it, that train will never move unless there is an engine somewhere on that track that generates its own power.
Right. Aristotle addressed this centuries ago with the concept of the prime mover.
The engine that pulls the train.
The first cause.
Exactly. There must be a first cause that is itself uncaused, something that exists outside the boundaries of time, space, and matter that initiated the sequence.
And Kuntz points out that religious philosophy identifies this first cause as the creator.
Yes. The materialist is forced into a corner. They must either claim that the universe popped into existence from absolute nothingness with no cause,
which violates the very foundation of science.
Or they must claim that matter has just existed infinitely, which, as we established earlier, violates the physical boundaries of matter itself.
I see how that solves the starting point problem logically, but a skeptic listening might argue that attributing that first cause to a conscious creator is a massive leap. They might ask, if there is this perfect scientific order, how can religion simultaneously claim that miracles happen? Doesn't a miracle completely break the laws of nature that this first cause supposedly created? How does Kuntz bridge that gap?
This is perhaps one of the most profound insights in Kuntz's writings. He challenges our very epistemological definition of what a law of nature actually is.
Okay, I'm listening.
We observe the sun rising, gravity working, water boiling at a specific temperature, and we casually call these laws, but Kuntz suggests that these laws are simply our limited human observation of God's habits.
God's habits, wow.
They are the usual consistent way the Creator chooses to maintain the nizam, the order of the universe.
So our entire endeavor of science is just us taking notes on how the universe usually behaves based on the habits of its designer.
Precisely. If a supreme creator established the rules of the universe, then a miracle is not a glitch in the system. It isn't a breakdown of reality or a violation of a law.
It's just a different application of the rules.
A miracle is simply a higher level of that same divine will, operating in a way that is currently beyond our limited scientific understanding. It is the rulemaker deciding to operate outside his usual habit for a specific, profound reason.
That makes total sense.
To an ant, a human stepping entirely over a puddle seems like a complete violation of the laws of physics. To the human, it's just a different level of capability.
That completely flips the script on how we view the natural world.
Yeah.
But what does this all mean? We've waded through some incredibly heavy philosophy looking at Marx's socioeconomic critiques, the limits of infinite matter, causal determinism, and the prime mover.
We've covered a lot.
We really have. Why does this ancient sweeping debate matter to you, the listener, right now in the modern everyday world?
It matters immensely because of human nature. The texts, particularly says in sociological analysis, make a deeply psychological observation about who we are. They argue that human beings are fundamentally intrinsically wired to worship.
It is an inescapable part of our psychology.
Therefore, when a society secularizes and attempts to completely remove the concept of God from the public consciousness, it doesn't actually remove humanity's need to worship. It simply shifts the target.
Void has to be filled. If you take away the vertical dimension of worship looking up toward a deity, people immediately seek out a horizontal dimension. Cezanne introduces this fascinating concept of Shiv Dinler, which translates to quasi-religions or religion substitutes.
Yes. When the traditional understanding of the divine is erased, people instinctively invent replacements. And what is so striking to observe sociologically is that the psychological behavior doesn't change one bit.
The fanaticism, the absolute devotion, the rigid dogmatism, the excommunication of non-believers.
It all remains intact. People just start worshiping political ideologies, celebrities, or sports teams with the exact same religious fervor.
It makes me think of a buddy of mine who treats his fantasy football league exactly like a religious cult.
I think we all know someone like that.
Right. There are strict weekend rituals, undeniable dogma about draft strategies, and if you suggest a trade that goes against his beliefs, you are essentially treated as a heretic. We laugh and call it a hobby or entertainment, but Cezanne is saying, sociologically, that is religious zealotry.
That is a shibdin, a quasi-religion.
The exact same human hardware is running, just with a different software loaded into it.
That is a perfect modern example. And while fantasy football is harmless, the texts point out that these quasi-religions can often become incredibly dangerous.
Why is that?
Because they lack the moderating moral frameworks of traditional religions. Traditional religions operate on a universal or evincial scale. They provide a moral framework built on patience, forgiveness, and seeing oneself as a humble, small part of a larger creation.
But when you replace that
universal humility with the worship of a political ideology, history repeatedly shows us that the resulting zealotry can be catastrophic.
it really forces you to look at modern society through a completely different lens. Are we actually less religious today, or are we just worshiping different, much smaller things?
The ultimate choice presented by these sources is incredibly stark. Throughout human history, societies generally have to choose between two paths. Either humans accept a universe centered around a creator.
What the texts refer to as an Allah-centric worldview.
Yes, or humans place themselves at the absolute center of reality.
Which brings us right back around to Nietzsche and his idea of the Übermensch, the Superman, who kills God and then has to create his own values and his own meaning.
And that is the crux of the existential dread we see in modern society. Placing humanity at the center of the universe historically leads to profound psychological crises.
Because it's too much pressure.
Exactly. If we are the highest power, if there's no ultimate justice and no ultimate meaning beyond what we invent for ourselves on a Tuesday, the burden becomes unbearable. The texts argue that we are simply not equipped to carry the weight of being the center of our own universe. When you are your own God, you have to justify your own suffering. It leads directly to the anxiety, the nihilism, and the fracturing of identity that defines so much of the modern era.
Wow. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started by looking at how atheistic thinkers like Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud tried to deconstruct religious belief by reducing it to sociology, guilt, and psychology.
And then the philosophical pushback.
Right, how a purely materialist, accidental universe completely struggles to explain the sheer order, causal determinism and purpose we observe every single day. We talked about the cosmic brake system, the logical necessity of a prime mover to pull the train, and how taking God out of the equation doesn't stop worship.
It just leads humans to worship ideologies and pop stars instead.
Exactly. It is a debate that touches every single aspect of how we live, how we structure our societies, and how we view reality.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider based on everything we've unpacked today. If human beings are biologically, psychologically, and sociologically wired to seek out order, meaning, and to worship something, whether it's a deity, a pop star, or an ideology, could that very inescapable wiring be the ultimate evidence that we were specifically designed to look for a designer?
I want to thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the nature of belief, reality, and what it means to be human. Keep questioning, keep looking closer at the world around you, and keep exploring. See you next time.